Shanti. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in whichever part of the world. Welcome to our exploration of Gyan and Yoga session with Sister Denise, or we call it in short, EGY. So for today, Sister Denise is going to take up the topic of obedience, faithfulness, trustworthiness, and she will be using the June 6th Avyak Murli as the reference. So Sister Denise has written her interpretation of this Murli, and we have posted it, I think, a few weeks ago. And hope you have read it, but if not, Sister Denise is going to read that with us and then make comments along the way, and then we will be having a discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Sister Rose. And there are so many changes that have been happening in the last, maybe you can say, year and a half, 2 years, that really makes us come down to the seed of what we're doing here, what is our relationship with each other, with Murlis, with Brahma Kumaris, with Bap Dada, with the cycle of 5,000 years, and where do we go from here? This question has been coming up so much. And these words, obedient, trustworthy, and faithful, have changed their meaning in many ways. So I think it's also brought us in front of the question that there is no such thing as universally accepted values. And when circumstances change, there is an impact of that on our value system and the different values of the different people in different cultures who are practicing Raj Yoga and meditation and studying all of this. And also between when we met together and now, I found myself able to complete a project that I was working on for quite a long time, which is the second chapter of the Gita, and comparing that with Gyan, and it's now ready. So this has also brought me in touch with the relationship between Gyan and Bhakti of the people who come from Brahma Baba's community and the people from India in India, the people from India outside India, the older generations, the more current generations, and then the people from the Western world and our interaction with Shiv Baba via all of these other aspects. What I thought I would do is, first of all, go through this Murli that I had translated differently from what you got it from London, because I found that the language that was used doesn't fit with our value system. The word obedience is not much used now. It used to be used, 100 years ago, a great deal. Students would have to obey the teachers and obey the rules, and kids would have to obey their parents and grandparents, and the patriarchal system was really strong. And nowadays, there are a lot of rules around, especially because of the COVID situation. But we don't use the word obedience, we use the word compliance. This is now the sort of American term that is used. And because there is so much concern about people going against the dominant authorities, the dominant people in charge, all this is coming under question. So let me begin by going through my interpretation of that Murli, which you all received, but I'd like to make some comments in between, and you may want to ask me why I put it like this, but mostly I put it like this because it corresponds, in my view, to the kind of terminology and language that we would put on how we feel and why we feel what we feel. And I think that there are some issues that are indicated, maybe provoked by this Murli, but not necessarily responded to by this Murli. And so we will take a look at some of those. So the title, the way that I put it, is the cause of not feeling good about yourself is lack of attention. And the original one was the cause of unhappiness is disobedience. And that's a very different vibration when you put it like that. But I thought about it long and deep. And, happiness is very subjective. And obedience can be interpreted in a million different ways. And our relationship with Gyan is not the relationship of children with religious authorities or parental authorities, because I think most of us who are in this gathering have been in Gyan for decades and are older, and we have made our lives, we live in positions of responsibility and so on. So these vocabularies that apply to children 100 years ago are not comfortable for us. Today, the Great Father, who makes you the highest, is seeing his sons from all directions who pay close attention to his teachings. So this is it. We are souls, we are sons of God, and we are in Gyan because it's interesting and it's meaningful to us. So we pay attention to the teachings. You all consider that you are attentive, but it varies. Some pay close attention, some pay attention, and some do not. There's a difference among you. All the necessary information is given to all of you equally. Now, one thing I'd like to say is that there are some people who relate to Gyan in a religious way, and there are other people who relate to Gyan in a more spiritual way or philosophical way. And if people are relating to it religiously, they think that that's the right way to relate to it. And if people are relating to it philosophically, they think that's the right way to relate to it. So what you have is many different people who are looking at Gyan through a different lens, through different value system. And because of that, the interpretation and explanation that they give to themselves and others is sometimes going to be very, very different. And I think that we have to understand ourselves and say, okay, this is me and I'm going at it from a religious angle, fine. Or this is me, I'm going at it from a philosophical angle. equally fine. And we have rights to our angle of coming at Gyan. It's no longer, it used to be one size fits all, but there's so many people, so different, that it can no longer be that. And also we're so large in terms of numbers. If you are attentive to each aspect of the teaching, then you remain aware, and in that higher consciousness means a combination of soul consciousness and awareness of Baba. So that higher consciousness, while you are thinking, speaking, and interacting, you have to be in that stage. Otherwise, when you are obedient, you can't be in that stage. When you are under somebody's authority, you can't be in that stage. You have to be in your own self-respect, and we have to interact with each other as equals, not as superior, inferior. And the word obedience implies superior, inferior, and that's really not fitting anymore. If you are not attentive at this level, then you have to keep on resetting yourself in higher consciousness. Sometimes your interactions are in a lower consciousness. And then you realize afterwards that you slipped out of higher awareness. So this is something that I'm very aware of, that because there's so much attention on doing service and not much attention on being a Raj Yogi anymore, the surrounding atmosphere that used to kind of get people to go into their soul conscious stage and into the higher conscious stage, that's no longer there. And so it's faded quite a bit. And I think that that's important for us to be aware about so that we can bring it back, because that's what Raj Yoga is about. So when you slip out of higher awareness, it means that you are not able to achieve the impact and the experience of functioning, relating, and interacting from that state of consciousness and being in your power. You realize later that you didn't operate at that level. So one thing to be aware of is that there are many people who grew up in, you can say, patriarchal system, who have acquired all sorts of ways of undermining each other, diminishing each other, putting each other down, causing each other to doubt their validity, and so on and so on. And these are like triggers. And there are a lot of people who do this as teachers of Raj Yoga, which of course they shouldn't be doing, but they do. And they think that it's part of Raj Yoga, but it isn't. And it is interfered with the way that Baba had prepared us to interact with each other. And this has crept in slowly, but I've seen it a great deal. And I think it's important for us to point it out to ourselves and to each other and ask ourselves, do we really want to go back to iron-aged ways of doing things, or do we want to be in the confluence age, in the consciousness that Baba had demonstrated to us? So you realize later that you didn't operate at that level. That means you were not in your power. Seeing the consequences of not being in your power, you realized that you were body conscious. So now it used to be very visible when people would slip into body consciousness, but now there's so much body consciousness that people say this is soul conscious, but it isn't. It may be a little closer to the mentality of religious people in their ego that they call soul conscious, but that's not the same as what Baba taught. It's a subtle thing, but it's a very big thing and very important. So this is what I wanted us to focus on today and tomorrow. So what Baba calls the desired state, which is really the desired state, is that you are naturally and effortlessly in your power, in higher consciousness. If you are inattentive to maintaining this level of consciousness, then you are in and out of higher consciousness. And those who never pay attention to come into spiritual consciousness are not in the game. There are two groups. The first group is very small. The second group is larger. The third group, the biggest group, is as if they knew nothing about higher consciousness. The first group is attentive to sustaining the practical state of higher consciousness from Amrit Vela until night. Their entire day is spent interacting and keeping themselves in that state of higher awareness. And they experience Baba's blessings as a consequence. At each step, those who are always attentive to their state of consciousness are in Baba's heart. Because of this, whatever they do is fruitful, successful. Each act is a seed, and the fruit of each seed is what happens as a result of the seeds that you sow. The seeds of action sowed by the first group are powerful because they maintain that powerful state of higher consciousness while engaged in interaction with others. When higher consciousness is sustained, you experience the satisfaction of being always in your power, and you get the results that you anticipate. Along with these two, your relationships with other souls are as they should be. And the three forms of fulfillment are naturally and continuously present for the first group. So we saw this very much in the dadis. They would stay in that consciousness, interact in that consciousness, and they would relate to us from that consciousness. But now the dadis are flown away, become avyakt, and now it's something very different going on. I was talking recently to some people in Madhuban, and the consciousness of hierarchy is becoming intensively more, and this whole thing of who is higher and who is lower and who has to obey whom is happening in a way that it never used to. And so it's very important for us to say to ourselves, okay, do I really need to be part of such a thing when your relationship with people for service is according to a duty? You may be in charge of something, and so others would need to go along with you. But when you start putting people, or you start behaving in a more tyrannical manner and keeping people seriously down, then we've really moved away from spirituality. And so this situation is creeping in, and we need to really see, are we part of that? Do we want to be part of that? Do we get pulled into that? If it's around us, what to do, because it's important to act sometimes you may be satisfied with how you are conducting yourself, yet you do not get the results you anticipated. The results will be less than you hoped for and last for a shorter time, and those around you will raise their eyebrows. In that case, you would not be in the first group. The first group maintains a continuous higher state of consciousness and sows seeds of self-empowered thoughts, words, and acts, and are appreciated by others. Now, you may be in the first group, but not in a position of power. And you may be in a position of power, but not in the first group. In the earlier days, it wasn't like that. Those who were in the first group were naturally in positions of power. They never abused their power. And now you start to hear people in positions of power using tactics to make other people afraid, and that's away from spirituality. And so this is the important thing for us to look at. At this time, even those who pay full attention to all three aspects find some people still criticize them. You also feel that there is no one whom everyone admires and respects. This is now, at the time of the Murli being spoken was 1988, and now it's 2021, so 35 years later or something. And the idea of someone that everyone or almost everyone admires and respects, that's difficult to find nowadays. So there will always be someone who is critical, and there are reasons for this. And you may misunderstand that the reason for their dissatisfaction has nothing to do with you. So if you put yourself in that position, there are people who criticize you. Why do they criticize you? And is it to do with you, or is it to do with them? So we need to use our power of discrimination to discern that. And this is where clashes of values come in, because in someone's value, the way someone should be according to their values is one thing, but in someone else's value system, it's okay. So this is a real issue, that there is multiple value systems among people who are not taking into consideration that the presence of multiple value systems is normal in a large gathering of people. We can't all be clones. So another issue is you criticize your elders when they do not fulfill your unreasonable expectations. Then the questions arise, what about when they do not fulfill your reasonable expectations? That is coming up. Thirdly, some souls are dissatisfied due to their own sanskaras and mentality, and they can be dissatisfied due to an outstanding karmic account. So this is one thing that we can see a great deal, that among BKs and between BKs and Lokik people, this is really a time where a lot of karmic accounts are really coming up and getting settled, and it's creating a fair amount of chaos actually in some places. So because of this, souls who persist in higher consciousness and are attentive cannot gain the respect of all souls, but 95% would hold them in high esteem. So don't expect everyone will appreciate you by a long way. 5% would remain critical. 5%, it may be more. The majority of those who pay close attention would be held in high esteem. They would have a clear conscience, and they would not keep questioning themselves as to whether or not they did the right thing. Now, some people, if they get accused because they're not compliant according to the accuser's expectation, they may have a clear conscience, but because of getting accused by people in high position, they may doubt themselves, and they may do the right thing, but they will be considered to not do the right thing. So it becomes confusing, it becomes complicated. And so we need to really pay attention on our conscience and listen to the voice of conscience. So those of the second group sometimes doubt whether or not they did the right thing. And the expression you use for this is that they have a guilty conscience. So it may be a guilty conscience, but there are situations where there are clashes of values, where it's very hard to know what is right because of these clashes of values. And it's not necessarily that you've done something actually wrong. You've just got a different set of values, but your values are not necessarily inferior to someone else's values. So we have to really take a look at our values and our value system and distinguish the values from the voice of conscience, because they're different. So those of the first group have a clear conscience and do not get moments of feeling guilty. They feel light because there is no burden of karmic debt. It was told to you earlier that one thing is to be in karmic relations of harmony, and the other is to interact under the shadow of karmic indebtedness. Now, these two things are quite tricky to discern, because there may be a clash of values, or there may be a karmic account. And sometimes those two look the same, but they're not the same. So we have to be very discerning to really see what's going on here. So those of the first group enjoy harmonious karma, and this is why they feel light. In all their interactions with others, the first group feels the blessings of Bapdada, and due to this, whatever they do is fruitful, and they experience fulfillment. Internally, their willpower is strong. So this is very good. You have relations of harmony, karmic harmony. You feel light. You feel blessings of Bapdada. And what you do is fruitful. And you feel fulfillment. This is very subjective, very internal. And sometimes all this can be present, but because of someone in authority undermining you, which happens, then that can mess up your inner feelings. So it's very important to really be in your power in case such a thing is going on, and not to allow it to pull you out of your state of being in your power. So internally, their willpower is strong, and they have the power to do what they want. They experience stable inner joy and fulfillment, and they feel they have everything they could wish for. Some of you present your inner distress to Bapdada saying that you do not know why you feel so empty inside. You say that you did not do anything wrong, yet you feel unfulfilled. It is not that you did anything wrong. However, in the process of your interactions, you are neglectful or careless and become inattentive to your state of consciousness. Now, what happens to a lot of people is that many BKs at the moment are thinking about, talking about social relations and giving a lot of attention to their social relationships with each other in such a way that their connection with Baba gets put on the back burner, and they think that Brahman family and social connections is yoga. And so they've gone out of balance. And this is happening to a huge extent. And so we also need to take a look at this and see what rebalancing is needed in this situation. So Baba says this is reflected in how you conduct yourself. So people who are not able to fulfill themselves with Gyan and yoga, they start to try to fulfill themselves from each other, and there may be some karmic accounts mixed up with this. Maybe they're not getting the sustenance that they need, and all of this is compromising their situation and brings them out of balance. So this is an important situation here. The weight of an earlier moment of inattention pulls you away from being in your power. So you're inattentive, you do something which is body conscious, and it takes the form of a weight, and then it's difficult for you to reset yourself in your higher consciousness or your being in your power. So what is this? It could be a harsh sanskar from a past life, and your negative mentality pulls you in spite of yourself. Such moments of inability to stay in higher consciousness exert a magnetic pull on you and draw you down into a lower state of consciousness. So this is settlement of an old karmic account from a past life or from this life. So Baba makes it very clear this is going on. And while this is going on, what do you have to do? You have to resist it. You have to get through it, pull yourself up into your higher consciousness. So Baba says, because you do not sustain the fire of love in a state of higher consciousness and powerful remembrance of Baba, you're not able to burn and neutralize that magnetic pull. So the magnetic pull is there, it's exerting itself on you, but you're not doing what you have to do to neutralize it. So this is a very important piece of spiritual work. You do not sustain a stage of consciousness like fire, the seed form, the lighthouse, the powerhouse. Therefore, you're unable to burn your karmic accounts. And this is why the outstanding karmic magnetism pulls you to itself. So this situation of karmic accounts, your relationship with authority, your relationship with institution, your relationship with governance, all these things are to do with sanskaras, to do with this life or last life. And there can be karmic accounts that make you forget how to be and what to be. So this is important. At such a time, you do not make any mistakes. You don't know why, but you don't feel like meditation or doing any service, or you feel a wave of depression coming over you. One thing is to feel peace through the knowledge, but it's quite another to be in silence with no sense of inner joy or bliss, but you go into dead silence. That means when things go wrong in your interaction with people, or people treat you badly, then you just want to be quiet, but that's not the same as the peace of Baba's remembrance. So Baba calls it silence without serenity. You just feel you want to sit alone somewhere. These are signs that you were inattentive and that an outstanding karmic account is pulling you. So in order to keep yourself in good space while outstanding karmic accounts are getting settled, you have to go through situations where people treat you really badly, and how you handle that is really important. That you don't take it personally, that you are strong enough to go through the feelings with the minimum amount of impact on you and stay in your power, and remembering that you're an actor and these are performances is really helpful for this. So one thing is to commit a sin or make a severe mistake, and it is another thing to be inattentive. So I put the word inattentive where Baba uses the translation that we have as disobedient. Because you see, when you use the word disobedient, it's like you're bad. So that means you put yourself down. If you use the word inattentive, it means, hey, I have to pay attention. Doesn't mean you're bad. It means wake up. That's what Baba's asking us to do. Baba advises you to practice meditation at Amrit Vela accurately, holding yourself in powerful connection. But if your Amrit Vela is not at that level, then is that as it should be? Engage in all your interactions while in a sustained state of higher consciousness, using your body and mental faculties as instruments. So when we get into a lot of involvement in social interactions with people, this is going to eat away at your relationship with Baba, because it's going to take over and you're going to revert back to your old sanskaras. And there's a lot of Brahmins who are experiencing that they can try and get into the spiritual practice, but it doesn't last very long, just a few days or whatever. Why? Because they went back to their old ways, but they called it being spiritual. And this happens, I find, more with people who are approaching Gyan in a religious manner, because before Gyan they were religious. And then if they become religious in Gyan, then reverting back to pre-Gyan religiousness is very, very easy to do, because you don't realize that you're doing that. So this is why we need to really look at ourselves and make ourselves what we need to be, and observe how little things, especially social things, pull us back to our old ways. And it is said when you're in Gyan that solitude is important, but for a lot of people, they don't really know how to have solitude, what solitude means, and how to really create this relationship with Sheikh Baba, because So many people were dependent on the center or dependent on senior yogis. These kinds of dependencies mean that you don't learn to be alone. And then you revert back to using your social connections, and then you get back into rather ordinary karma, and then your spiritual power fades away. So engage in all interactions while in a sustained state of higher consciousness, using your body and mental faculties as instruments. This would be accurate. There are many examples of this, but one is that your perception of everyone is spiritual, but sometimes this perception slips away. And do you see people as souls, or do you see them as men and women, or what their position is, or what their interests are? So then you do not fulfill the meaning of spiritual interaction, and you do not remain in your power or in higher consciousness. This causes an accumulation of debt, which will definitely pull you away from being stable in higher awareness. This is why you cannot sustain a level of higher awareness or remain in your power while interacting with others. You become ordinary. You all say you are doing all right, but when asked if you are as you should be, you admit that you are not. You receive many signals and you know better. What is the reason that you are not as you should be? The magnetic pull or the weight of karma from a past life or from this life prevents you from being double light. Sometimes you are light, but other times you are weighed down. You cannot sustain a continuous state of inner joy, happiness, or serenity. It prevents you from feeling that you are part of the group of closely attentive ones who experience special blessings from Bab Dada. So that group doesn't have group consciousness at all. These are very solitary, mystical Raj Yogis, but they're on the same level. So therefore, sometimes you find it easy and other times it is laborious. Now you are clear about the characteristics of those in the first group of attentive ones. Now, let us see the second group. If you are lacking in these specialities, then you are in the second group. You want to be part of the first group or rosary. It is not difficult. Be attentive to follow each recommendation. Follow in the footsteps of the Father. It is easy to do this. All of you are Sitas. You are my brides, and brides follow in the footsteps of the groom. This is the method. It is not hard. As my children, you would follow the footsteps of your father and do as the Father tells you. If you follow each of his recommendations, you would be called number one attentive. So check yourself and do the right thing. So that's as far as I went, because then the Murli went to parties and things like this. We have to really think to ourselves that what is this that I'm in? What is Raj Yoga really all about? And many people, they are taking the word family and wanting to be sustained and supported by the family, but the family doesn't sustain and support them in the way that they want. And then they get distressed or upset or grumpy or something like this. And if their spiritual practice is not satisfactory, And naturally, you don't feel good when your spiritual practice is not satisfactory. And it's easy to look for something on the outside to blame. And now that we really do not have the kind of sustenance that used to be there many, many years ago, in spite of all the many, many things that are there on the internet, it's not really doing the job that needs to be done, in the sense that we have to really look at ourselves, that, okay, am I practicing Raj Yoga, studying Gyan in such a way that I'm able to sustain myself and keep up my level and not get dependent on external BK activities or BK people to keep me up, because now circumstances are different. So I am going to stop there. We have had more or less about an hour where I went through this, and tomorrow we'll really take a close look at these words, you know, obedient. And as you saw in the Murli, I changed the word obedient to attentive, and I explained why. And now we have to really think, am I attentive on myself? Am I attentive to my connection with Baba? And what does that mean? And really ask yourself, why are you doing this practice? And there are so many reasons why a person would do this. But if you do this because you think it's true, that makes things very clear. Because if you think it's true that you're a soul, then it's up to you to make sure that you stay in soul consciousness. If you think it's true that Baba is here, he has come and he's told us who he is, he's established a relationship with us and told us how to sustain that relationship. But we have to think, are we doing this as Baba is telling us to do this, or as various other BKs are telling us to do this? Because they may or may not be telling us what Baba is telling us. And sometimes people kind of deviate from that original essential way that Baba has shown us. And I think one of the reasons is because people mix their value system into Gyan and call it the same thing, or they mix their ego into it, or they mix their reaction to their difficulties of life into it, and then it's no longer the kind of pure, clear Gyan that Baba is offering us. So I think we have a very good opportunity to really go deep and ask ourselves, you know, why am I doing this? And if you're doing this because you really know that you're spiritually depleted and that you cannot fill yourself either by service or by the Brahmin family or by any of these other various distractions that are there, but the actual meditation, the actual remembrance of Baba is the most important thing, and the material that feeds your remembrance is Gyan. So Gyan and yoga, this is why we call this explorations of Gyan and yoga. And then when you ask yourself, what am I supposed to be faithful to? Are you faithful to yourself? Are you faithful to Baba? Are you faithful to your intention, why you are doing this? Or do you get pulled by other people trying to bring you under their influence and sort of deviate you away from your track? Because sometimes this happens very subtly, very easily, and then things do not work as they should. And surrender, loyalty, all these words, that we used to think of, surrender to Baba, surrender to the daddies, surrender to the organization. You get a kind of like a utopian view of things, maybe a little childish. And now circumstances are such, and karmic accounts are happening such, that really we have to be in our higher consciousness, in our power, and really strong for the coming days. So let's just have just a moment of quiet, and I turn it over to Rose. Om Shanti. Om Shanti.
Thank you, Sister Denise. When I first got hold of your interpretation of the June 6 Murli, and I noticed that the word obedience was translated or interpreted into attention or being attentive. And, like I felt somehow I felt lightened by it. Like there is no imposition. And I said to myself, because I never did like this word obedience. And so reading your interpretation, and now you going through it, really puts this context in a very different perspective. And it made understanding Gyan and following it, come from a place where I become more responsible and accountable to my own progress.